Good morning, Shavua Tov, Shalom. The shiur today would be the sort of the last one of this series for the summer. And because next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, I want to have something dedicated to Tisha B'Av. So this week, we would speak about Rabbi Yechezkel Landau. Rabbi Yechezkel Landau lived throughout the 18th century. He was born in 1713, and passed away at 1793. So 80 years. To be more exact, it's exactly 80 years and 6 months. 80 years and 6 months. He was born in Yudchet Cheshvan and was niftar in Yudchet Iyar. So that would make it 80 years and 6 months. And he is, as I put in the title, arguably can be seen as the last of the great Mohicans. That's the last of the great traditionalists. After him, as I hope that we'll be able to explain a little towards the end of the shiur, you can be Orthodox, you can be Hasidic, you can be Torah im Derech Eretz, you can be many things which are observant. But in a sense, in the Ashkenazic world, you would not be able anymore to be a traditionalist, because tradition during his lifetime in the 18th century is going to meet some challenges that would not let it just stay as it is. It would need to merge something anew. And Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, in many ways, I think, represents this phenomena and represents the strength of traditionalism. I'm not speaking about orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is different than traditionalism. So he represents the strengths, and he also, in a way, we can look at what happened to Prague after him to see also the weaknesses of traditionalism. So after that introduction, let's begin to speak about Rabbi Yechezkel himself. So Rabbi Yechezkel, as I said, was born in 1713 in a city named Apta. And his father, he came from a very, very, very prestigious family, both in terms of Torah learning and in terms of money. So as we had many times in the last months, we speak here again about the elite of Ashkenazic, of Polish Jewry. Now, Polish, back then, when you speak about Poland, that is before the partition. So Poland is huge. It's Poland and Lithuania and almost everything there in between. So it's a huge country. His father was a very important functionary in what was called Vad Arba Aratzot. That was the overboard committee, the federation, we would say today, of the Jewish communities of Poland. And he had a very important role there. He was very rich. And if I understand correctly, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was his only son. He may have other daughters, I don't know, and back then they would not necessarily write if they had more daughters. But if I understand what is written correctly, he was the only son. So a lot of investment and a lot of hopes went into his education. There is a very interesting, just a short remark on it by Rabbi Yechezkel Landau himself in his introduction to the noda biyehuda. You may ask yourself why someone that his name is Yechezkel names his book Noda biyehuda. I should name it Noda Yechezkel. Why Noda biyehuda? So it's in the first source here on the page. It says, Uben av יכבד. So a son has to respect his father. Ben av יכבד. בחייו ובמותו משועבד. I guess that in Ashkenazic pronunciation it somehow is rhyming. So Ben av יכבד, בחייו ובמותו משועבד. I'm not sure why, but obviously that's supposed to be a rhyme. יכובד. Beautiful. No, Ben av יכובד, the son is respected. It makes no sense.
The Hebrew is irrelevant.
I don't know. Okay, I don't know. Anyhow, Ben Av, whatever, יכבד, יכובד, בחייו ובמותו משועבד. אף כי אבי. So he says, that is correct for every father, but for my father, אשר הרבה טובי, he granted me a lot of good. הוא גדלני בתורה, והרבה עליי המשרה. So he was the one that raised me to Torah and gave me important positions. ואותי לא נתן לצאת לגינה ולביתן. That's such an interesting sentence. He says, if I read it correctly, it says, as a young boy, he didn't let me go out to play in the park. לא נתן לצאת לגינה ולביתן, ואלי רב חיבר בחריפות מאוד להתגבר. So instead of going and playing with the other children at the playground, his father hired a private rabbi, private teacher, to sit down and learn with him. And he says, that was my teacher, מורי ורבי יחזקאל אייזק סגל מלאגמיר, למדתי אצלו מהיותי בר 11 עד היותי בר 13. So he taught him for 2 years or 3 years, from 11 to 13. וצורכי הרב הספיק ומתנות רבות העניק. And he says, we can read it forward if you want, but very shortly what he says is that the reason why I was accepted so quickly and so easily, and people began to send me questions, was because my father was so known. So in the beginning, they just wanted to respect him. Now, I would add that it does not write, but I would add they came in order to respect his father, but when they saw the genius that Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was, because he was for sure, then, as they say, they came for the service and stayed. They came because of the price and stayed because of the service, right? So they came in order to respect his father, but they stayed because the responser was great. The answers were excellent. He was really an excellent responser. So already at the age of 20, he began to send answers all over Europe, all over Europe. At the age of 13, before 20, at the age of 13, his father sent him away to an overboard school, right? Boarding school. Now, it was a place in a city named Brody, or Brad, depends on from where exactly you are. And in Brody, they had something that was called the Clois of Brody. Clois is a shul, or a bet midrash. And there was a certain guy that was extremely rich, and he was supporting young children, such as Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, which seems that didn't really need the financial support, but he needed the institution. So he created a whole institution and financed it of young people from the age of 13 to the age of 23, or sometimes even older, just sitting and learning all day. And Rabbi Yechezkel describes that he would sit there for 6 days a week and not step outside of the midrash. They would sleep inside the Beit Midrash. The building was still standing. 2 years ago, because it was not repaired, then 2 years ago, the roof collapsed. But the building still stays, and I guess that sometimes they will repair it and maybe make it into some type of a museum. Because many Gdolei Torah land there. Maybe Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, the noda biyehuda, was the most famous of them, but there were many others, very important people learning there. And so there he was making his first steps, because there were many great minds there, but he was the greatest. And they began to ask him questions. Even people that were older than what he was were asking him questions. And then Rabbanim from all over were beginning to send him questions. Also, he got married to a very important family, etc., etc., etc. And his wife was willing, it was part of the conditions between them, that he would not return home only on Shabbatot. So for 6 days, he would stay in the Klois, in this koilel, and only on Shabbat, he would come back. Many years later, they were married for 58 years before she passed away. We have the Hesped that is said after her bed. And in it, he says that one may think that the reason why she agreed was because she loved him. And says this is correct, but you should know it's not the only reason. It's also because she was a real tzadeket and that was a way to support Torah learning. So that's beautiful. When the two reasons that you can debate is whatever it was done out of love for him or out of love for Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a beautiful hesped. It's really a beautiful hesped. Now, so why did he name the book Noda biyehuda? So you can already guess. Yehuda was the name of his father. And biyehuda, he argues that the letter bet can sometimes mean because, for. So noda biyehuda biglal Yehuda. I became famous, he says, because of my father. So he comes back and pay tribute to his father. Very interestingly, he published a second book, also extremely important, very much learned, maybe not as the noda biyehuda. Noda biyehuda is his responsa. He also published his commentary on the Gemara, on the Shas. He named his commentary on the Gemara the Tzalach, Tzadik Lamed Chet, which is a Rashi Tevot for Tziyun Lenefesh Chaya. The name of his mother was Chaya. So he named both of his books after his parents. And you can see his admiration, I think, to them. And also, as I said earlier, you can begin to see this pattern. As I said, he was a very strong traditionalist. Now, relying on the tradition you received from your parents is obviously one of the hallmarks of being a traditionalist. After, so he learned, as I said, in the closet body. He became, at the age of 20, he became a dayan in Brody. Now, for some reason, at the age of 30, he left Brody. We are not completely sure why. There is a rumor that is not, I mean, it cannot be verified, but there is a rumor seemingly dating from back then that the reason why he had to leave Brody was because he had a certain decision that went against a famous rich person, a famous gvir in the city, in the town, and it was, I mean, it was not a very pretty question. It was a question of a betrayal of his wife and a complicated story. The story does appear in his responsa, but it doesn't give you the place. He says, this is a question I received from very far away. That's what he says. That's what he writes. But we know from a testimony of his son that this is a question that was from Brody. The only question is that really the reason why he had to leave? And that we do not know. Be it as it may, at the age of 30, he moves to a small town named, I hope that I read it correctly, Yampla. So it's a small town. It's a small town. And what it was, the reason why it was really important to be a rabbi of a small town, let him on one hand to feel the meaning of leading people in the not simple times of the 18th century, but it still left him with a lot of time to continue his learning and to continue answer questions from very far away. He has, in his responsa, he has questions obviously from Europe, but also from Constantinople, what we call today Istanbul, and from Israel, and from other places. So even in what we call the Sephardic world, he was known as a great posek, and he was, and also obviously all the time, the improvement of the postal offices, of the services of the post that you can send and receive. It doesn't take a year before you get an answer. That, of course, encourages you to ask questions. Jews were sending questions for thousands of years, but it used to be that you would send a question and it would take 7 months or 8 months till the answer would come, and then you would hope that the other guy had enough paper, let's say, to write a long answer. But now things are changing quickly, and he's sending answers all over the world. One interesting answer that I would like to read with you is in source ד' in your source sheets. על דבר תמיהתו, so someone send the noda ביהודה, someone sent רבי יחזקאל לנדאו a question, על דבר תמיהתו, על שנוהגים בהרבה מקומות שנוכרים מדליק נרות ביום הכיפורים לעת תפילת נעילה. So that's a question of yesteryear. We don't have electricity, we have candles. Now candles have this unpleasant minhag to just be go off, go away. So you need to rekindle them. So you began at the beginning of Yom Kippur, but now you're in Tfilat Ne'ilah. Tfilat Ne'ilah, it's already dark outside, and it's not, you'd have the same problem every Motzei Shabbos, but usually it's okay, it's Tfilat Arvit, everyone knows it by heart. Not such a problem. But here, you don't know Tfilat Ne'ilah, it's a difficult Tfilah. People don't know it by heart. So you would have a goy coming in and lighting candles to all the individuals praying in the shul. That's a problem, because you are not supposed to enjoy, to derive benefit from a melacha done by a non-Jew for your sake. So that's an avera being done in shul, in Yom Kippur. Says the noda ביהודה, ידע מעלתו, כי פה קהילתנו, he writes that when he's already on Prague. He says, פה קהילתנו בעזרת השם יתברך כבר נתבטל המנהג הזה. I cancel this minhag. The goy doesn't come anymore. וגם בהיותי בקהילת קודש ימפלה, כשבאתי לשם, מצאתי שהיו נוהגים, כן, גם כן ביטלתי המנהג הזה. He says, I canceled the whole thing. Now, that's a complicated achievement. I would explain why. Because it means that most of the people won't be able to do the Tfilat Ne'ilah, because they don't know it by heart. He says, I would allow, maybe if there is no light, I would allow him to light one candle for the chazan. So the chazan would be able to say out aloud. But just for the sake, he say, of the piyutim, that's not good enough reason to allow people to derive benefit from the melacha of a non-Jew on Shabbat. Now he knows that you can rely on some halachic opinions to allow it. When I say some halachic opinions, there is an halachic opinion recorded by the Rema in the Shulchan Aruch that for the sake of great mitzvah, you are allowed to enjoy the melacha of a non-Jew on Shabbat or Yom Tov or Yom Kippur for that sake. But he says, saying the piyutim, I don't think it's an important of enough mitzvah. You can just listen to the chazan. So that's a very strong stance, obviously. That's a very strong stance. But he believes that's the right halachic position. And no, people still were happy that he was the rabbi. So I guess that he was able to move that, to pass that. After a few years, to be accurate, he came to Yampela in 1743, as I said, in the age of 30. In 1755, after 12 years in Yampela, he suddenly leaves. Again, we are not sure what was the reason for him to leave. However, there is an answer in source Hey here. It's a very complicated question about a guna. שאלה, אחד הלך מקהילת קודש בריילוב לדרכו לפולין קטן. Polin Katan is one, we said there are 4 lands that Poland was made out of. So one of them was called Polin Katan. Fine, it's just a certain area. ולא חזר לביתו. So some guy went and did not return. וכאשר חקרו, נמצא הרוג. So they began to investigate and they found someone dead. Now, obviously the question is the man that we had found dead is the same person that went missing? Now, it's important for many reasons, but the primary concern, obviously, is the wife. We want to enable her to marry again. ויש קצת סימנים בבגדה וקצת בגופו. So there are a few marks on the body and on the clothes that can establish a connection between the dead person and the missing person. But there is one problem. His wife said that he has a sign, meaning a tzaleket. How do you say a tzaleket? A scar. He has a scar on his thumb on the left thumb. They found a scar, but it was on the right thumb. So it seems that the woman was very young. The man that was handling the whole case with the noda biyehuda was the grandfather of the wife. So I would guess that the wife was 15 and her grandfather was 50 and he was the one conducting the business. So the grandfather came to the noda biyehuda. He said, obviously she got confused, but it's the same person. She got confused. But it seems that she was insisting. So it was a complicated question. It was a complicated question. And he says, I would like to answer, but I have a problem. All my books were burned because there was a fire in the city. So he says, no, that's an amazing tshuva. He says, you know what, because I have no choice, I must give you an answer. I would answer by heart, just quoting all the sources by heart, but I would like you to go to another two rabbanim that would check the sources and see that they agree with what I wrote. So that's being able. I think we already said in one of the last shiurim that tshuvot about aguna are the most complicated questions that a Rav can meet, and 95% of the rabbis would not answer them. They would just refer them to a higher authority. Being able to answer such a question without sfarim, just writing everything from memory, it's an amazing, amazing skill, an amazing control, you may say, of the material. In the end, he says that if you would be able to convince the wife to take back her contradicting statement about the place of the scar, and he says, please work harder to try to identify a few more signs with the clothes, so we'd have a more firm ground to stand on, and then she can remarry. And then he writes, now, if you want to continue and discuss it with me, please know that I'm leaving the city in a few days. So I won't be available in this address. What we maybe can conjure, maybe, is that the reason he left was because of this fire that consumed all of his books and everything that he had. And that's not the reason yet to leave the city. But if you anyway plan or think about leaving, then all your house being burned is a very good motivation to start again. So he's leaving and he's getting a position in the big city of Prague. Now, Prague is not Yampala. Prague is a big, great city. As it says in Sefer Yonah, Ir Gdola LeElohim Me'od. So it's a very big Jewish city. If I remember correctly, in the 18th century, 25% of the residents of Prague were Jewish. Now that was the crown city of the Habsburg Empire. So we speak about a very important city with a very important Jewish community. Excuse me. But there he also meet with the challenge that first European Jewry and then all of the Jewish world would have to face, and that is the Enlightenment. Because this is a modern city, as modern as they come. That is not Prague of the 60s of the 20th century. It is not communist Prague. This is a very modern, a very liberal city, very in the standards of the day. But we've developed science, we've developed philosophy. Christianity is beginning to suffer. And people are slowly but surely are slipping away from observance. Many people not completely stop being observant, but it begins. The process begins. Now we know in hindsight, which is always 2020, so we know in hindsight that is the beginning of a process which is very large. So if when the noda biyehuda was born and Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was born, I'm just throwing numbers, which obviously I have no idea about, but I'm just guessing. So let's say that 90% of the Jews were observant. Now, when I say observant, I don't mean that each one of them came to 3 times a minyan a day. But I mean, if you'd ask him, should a Jew come to a minyan 3 times a day? He would say yes. He would say yes, but I have problems. I need to walk, I need to X, I need to Y, I am weak. But he would say that's the ideal. In 1793, when the noda biyehuda would leave this world, it would be in places like Prague, it's already going to be very, very, very different. And that's something the noda biyehuda was trying to wrestle with, but it's not something simple to oppose and to stop. So, a few questions from his time in Prague that reflect this challenge that he is facing. Now, these are questions that are not as difficult as questions of agunot, but as you will see, in a sense, they are more difficult. Let's look at source Vav. תשובה לרב המופלא ומופלג בתורה ובמעלות נרו יאיר, פה כבוד מורנו רבי יוסף נרו. Fine. So the answer is to a certain rabbi. על דבר קפה שלין של אינם יהודים בקפה הייזר שלה. So, the question is about sitting in a coffee house, a goyish coffee house. Is a Jew allowed to sit there? Now, he's not going to drink the milk. Right? The problem is with the milk. The coffee is coffee. Just it's a vegetable. It's not a vegetable. It's a fruit. It's a fruit. But it's just I mean, there's no problem with the coffee. There's no problem with the water. But they drink in Prague, in the coffee houses of Prague, they drink coffee with milk. So the Jew can come in and say, I want coffee without milk. But what about the cups, the mugs? Right? They are used also for milk. Now, the answer is interesting not only because of the halacha. He says, יפה הורה לאיסור, שאין כאן שום ספק, ובוודאי בני יומן שכל שעה שותים הם חלב שלנו יהודי. He says, obviously, the halav is asur because it's what we call halav akum. And that would mean the mugs are asur, are treif, and that's the end of the story. Because it's hot, so you are not allowed to drink from it. And then he says, מה שהשיב לו המשיב, שבפראג שותים בני תורה בבתים של אינו יהודי. So why would the noda biyehuda receive such a simple question? The Rav that sent him the question says, I have a problem with you, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau. Why? Because I am trying to convince my community not to drink coffee in goyish coffee houses, in the local Starbucks. And they tell me that in Prague, in the great Jewish community, the yeshiva students are going there. Your students are going to coffee houses. So how can I stop my community members from going to as I said, to the local Starbucks? That's an amazing question. That's an amazing question. What would he say? ידע רו מעלתו, אם הם בני תורה, אינם בני יראה, והם הקלי דעת. He says, you are right. These are yeshiva students. They are bnei Torah. They learn Torah. But they are not bnei yirah. We would say today they are not frum. Is that? They are... Yeah, they do not have the fear of God. That is the literal translation. So they learn Torah. They go to the yeshiva. But they are not so strong in keeping the mitzvot. Now, I wouldn't say that never happened in the past. But having it as a phenomena, to a degree that people would send him questions from other cities. So you see that the yeshiva of the noda biyehuda himself was far from immune from the dangers of the time. And he continued to discuss it, and he says that halomdim hayereim, if you look at one line from the end of this source, he says, halomdim hayereim nizarim milishtot beveit eino yehudi. So the people that are learned and are fearful of God, they do not drink coffee in the houses of the non-Jews. ואפילו בעלי בתים שיש להם ידיעת בית רב. He says also some of the בעלי בתים, but they are a little better educated, so they also avoid that. ולמחות בהמון אין כוח בידינו. So the great noda ביהודה, the man that was able to prevent them from lighting the candles, right? And on Yom Kippur, in Eilah, he says, I am not able to stop them from going to the coffee houses. למחות בהמון, אין כוח בידינו. I don't have the strength to do that. That is an amazing confession. So people are doing just whatever they want. The Rav of the city can stand there. Now, for you, it's simple that the Rav would speak and nothing would happen. But 250 years ago, that is unheard of. So, but he says that I have no ability to stop them. Another question. Again, very interesting. That's source Zayin. תשובה. שלום להי צור והעוסק בחוקי חורב, הרב הגדול, כבוד אהובי, האלוף התורני, מורנו ורבינו הרב רבי, see the name, גומפריכט אופנהיים. גומפריכט אופנהיים. Now, he's beginning to say that he is חכם, הרב הגדול, האלוף התורני, so these are many compliments about Torah and his learning of Torah. But see the next line. מכתבו קיבלתי, ואם אינני מכירו ולא ידען עלי, אך אשר בא לשאול שאילתה או משאלתי בלישנא דחוכמתא, הנני משיב לכל שואל. So he says, I don't really know who you are, but because your question is formulated in a wise way, I would give you an answer. What was the question? שורש שאלתו, איש אחד אשר זיכהו השם בנחלה רחבה. So there is a certain Jew that is a landlord. So he had climbed in the ladder, and he's a landlord. ויש לו כפרים ויערות. So he has towns, and he has forests. So he's what they called, he's a paritz. Poritz. He's the Goyish landlord. It's called you don't know the word? There is no English, it's like a shegets. You don't have an English translation to that. So that's the Goyish landlord. Usually it would be a slur. It's a diminishing word. When you say someone is a paritz, that means that he is behaving in a very how would they say that? He's very rich. He doesn't care about anything. He just hedonistic, right? So that would be the paritz. But here he's a Jew, and again, this is a sign of the times. Jews are allowed to buy land. Jews are allowed to be the owners of towns, assumingly with Christians inside. Owners of forests. Now what the question is, אשר ביערות תרמוס כל חי תויר, in the forests there are animals obviously, אם מותר לו לילך בעצמו, לירות בקנה שריפה, לצוד ציד. So this guy wants to hunt for sport with a gun, קנה שריפה. That's again, a Jew going out, shooting a gun, animals, killing animals, we're living in a different world. Even for us, I think it's a somewhat of an interesting question. But again, back then, I don't know, it's just unheard of. That's like the Ukrainian guy would be the master of the pub and the Jews would come in to drink. That's something that does not happen. So are you allowed, that's the question, according to halacha, to go and hunt only for sport? You're not going to eat it, you're a Jew, right? You do not eat animals that you hunt with a gun. So the noda biyehuda is answering in a very polite way, but he is shocked from the question. He says it's immoral to shoot animals for your fun. It's an interesting answer. He says you are allowed to use animals to your benefit, so no problem. If you want to slaughter them and to eat them, that's fine. If you need to use the skin for something, then you are allowed. But just shooting animals for the fun? He says that's immoral. That's achzariyut. Achzariyut means cruelty, which is the sign of the non-Jews. The sign of being a Jewish is being humble and being merciful on everything that was created by God. That's what he writes to this Jewish nobleman. A beautiful answer. And then he has he adds on it. He says also it seems to be dangerous going with a gun and shooting. And he's playing now the role of the Jewish mother. So he says you shouldn't do these type of things. It's endangering yourself for no reason. So that's, again, but that's an answer that no rabbi had. That's a question that no rabbi had for 500 years, right? He just had to make up the answer. Another question, source chet. That's one of his most famous psikot. Shalom Rav לגדול ורב. הרב הגדול, כבוד אהובי מחותני, ידידי וחביבי. So that's his mechutan. So that's the father, how do you say mechutan?
In-laws.
No, it's not in-laws. He's mechutan is the father of his son-in-law. But yeah,
There's no English word.
there is no English because there is no relation. Okay, so he's the father of his son-in-law. He's also a rabbi because, as I said, they are all rabbis' families marrying each other. So he's also a rabbi, and he has a complaint against the noda biyehuda. What is the complaint? The noda biyehuda, I wouldn't read it now inside. He gave an hater to shave on Chol HaMoed. Shocking, right? Now, even shaving every day, that was not a Jewish thing to do. So again, 250 years ago, that's a new thing. And may that you are shaving every day, but on Chol HaMoed, it's against the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you're not supposed to shave on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because they want you to prepare yourself from before the Chag. And if you'd be allowed to shave on Chol HaMoed, then you'd neglect shaving on the eve of the first holiday. So they say, do not shave during the Chol HaMoed. Fine. So he gave an hater to do that, and he published it. And this rabbi comes to him and says, how can you give an hater, and published it in a book against the Mishnah? And don't you know that people are now looking for heterim? And if you give them the finger, they will take the whole hand. Because in the minute that you say the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishnah are not a solid line, okay, so you give an hater on something you think is not so important, and they would take everything. So this guy is very worried about what is going on. And then the Yehuda says, calm down. First, calm down. And he says, I'm in control of the situation, and I am not pasking out of fear. It's very interesting. He says, I am pasking according to the truth and not out of fear. Okay, that's interesting. And then he continues and he says, now I would have to tell you, I have a secret reason why I allow them to shave on Chol HaMoed, but I am not going to tell you. That's the answer. I am not going to tell you. Just look at the last line in source chet. Atam kamus belibi. You see in the middle of the last line. Atam kamus belibi velo ucha legaloto. So I have a reasoning. It's in my heart, and I cannot reveal it to you. Im yaftzir, even if you would continue sending letters, lo ashiv. I am not going to send you any answers. 50 years later, the Khatam Sofer revealed the reasoning of the noda biyehuda, and it was the following. People were not just shaving. They were shaving with what we call a ta'ar, a knife. That is an Isur Torah. Now, why it would be better if they would shave with a ta'ar on Chol HaMoed? So here, he has the following cheshbon, math. He says, look, Isur Torah, the Torah prohibition on shaving with a knife, is only when the hair exceeded a certain length. If it's very, very, very small, it's still asur, but it's only a rabbinical isur. It's not a deoraita. It's not a deoraita. So if I tell them do not shave on Chol HaMoed, and they would follow my instruction because they shave with a knife in their home, but when they come to shul, if I say do not shave, then this is the guy coming to shul, they do not shave. So after 5 days of Chol HaMoed, they would have the beard would be long enough, so it would be an Isur Deoraita. So I prefer telling them to shave every day, so there would be only an Isur De Rabbanan and not an Isur Deoraita. he didn't want to publish that because that would really cause people, openly to completely disregard the Isur, so that he didn't want to write. But again, you see the type of calculations he had to do. And that's, what can I say? It's sad in a sense. It's sad. And he gave this hater. The Khatam Sofer revealed. So he was told by the noda biyehuda or by one of his sons. That seems to be the source of his knowledge. That seems to be the source of his knowledge. Now, the noda biyehuda, it's a complicated topic when we come to try and appreciate as a type. He was a rabbi in Prague for 40 years. He came there at about 40 something, 38 years. He was the rabbi of Prague. And when we are trying to appreciate, in hindsight, as I said, his work, on one hand, he is one of the most important poskim of the last 400 years. He published more than 850 answers. And all of them are important. All of them, if you are dealing with something that he wrote about, you must bring it in the analysis of your own. You cannot ignore, because it's the noda biyehuda. Extremely important posek. Very influential. On the other hand, what did happen to Prague? So Prague was, as I said, a huge town with yeshivot, with shuls. About 100 years after the death of the noda biyehuda, there were still many Jews in Prague. Very few, less than 100 families were attending the shul. And when you went there and you have to be taken to see Jewish life, they would take you to the cemetery. The Jewish cemetery of Prague, by the way, is amazing. I think it's the most ancient cemetery in Europe, a Jewish cemetery in Europe. So it's amazing. But that was the Jewish life of Prague in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Obviously, then Hitler came and that was the end of everything. But Jewish observant Prague, we may say, was non-existent. Now, chas v'chela, we do not blame the noda biyehuda in that. I hope that is clear. He was a giant of Torah. But he was not able, and maybe no one would have been able, to confront the powers that he was working, or that were working against him. That was enlightenment, that was modernity, that was the changing nature of European culture, that was emancipation. Now, not complete emancipation, but the beginning of emancipation. Jews were given rights, but there was a price to be paid for these rights. The price to be paid was you would be given rights, but if you are being given rights, you need to be more like us. And the Jews, many of them, were willing to take the pin. And yes, if we are granted emancipation, then we understand that we cannot stand out so much. We need to better blend. And you begin in better blending, and very, very quick, very fast. In generation, sometimes less than a generation, you lose almost everything. And he tried. Obviously he tried. There is a drasha he gave. There is no ear, unfortunately. I think it's from his last years, but I cannot know for sure. It's in source stat. Lo midrash ikar, it's a drasha from Shabbat Shuvah, so between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Lo midrash hu העיקר, אלא המעשה, וזהו עיקר כוונת הדרוש שלי. He says, I'm standing and speaking here in shul, not in order to speak. לא המדרש עיקר, it's not the drasha, it's not the sermon that is what is important, but the act, the maise, what would happen as a consequence of my drasha. כי מה בצע בפשטים ודרשות? What use there is, he says, to give you pshatim, to give you explanation on psukim, or to give sermons. ידעתי כי יש גדולי ישראל שיודעים לפלפל בחוכמה ואינם צריכים לתורתי. He says, I know that in the crowd there are people that are learned and they can learn more than what I can. I don't think they had been, but let's say they do not need my Torah. They think they do not need my Torah. Fine. ואם לקנות שם אצל ההמון, ידעתי ימצאו כמה וכמה יאמרו, מה חידש הרב. So maybe you think that I'm speaking here in order to get respect from the regular, from the masses. He says, I know the truth. Most of the people, excuse me, would just say, מה חידש הרב? Well, the Rav didn't say anything new. ודבר שאפילו תינוקות יודעים. Everything this Rav says, even baby knows. וכל פלפולו הוא ביעל כגם על פי מנהגי פולניה. And if I give a drush about halacha, they say he speaks about pilpul as in Poland. You begin to see, right, this differentiation between Ostenjuden, right? These Jews in Poland, these old Jews that speak about halacha and Gemara. We in Prague, we speak philosophy, right? We speak theology in our drashot. He says, כאילו בני מדינות הללו יש להם תורה אחרת. They say it as seemingly they have other Torah than this Torah of Poland. אבל כל זה אני מוחה להם. You said, but you know what? I am willing to skip all of that, to overlook. That's they make laugh of me. They say that I am old, that I am old school. I'm coming from Poland. My Torah is Polish Torah. Fine. Shari leimari lechol man demetzar li. I am giving a permission to everyone that causes me sorrow. וכל דברי גנאי שמגנים אותי בפני ההמון. And he says, I know that people speak and they defame me. That's the word. In front of the people. They slander me. עדיין, and he says, עדיין לא הגיעו לשליש ולרביע מה שאני יודע ניגי עצמי. But you know, they didn't. I know that I have so many flaws. Everything that you would say is not even a quarter of my flaws. So he says that I'm fine with that. והלוואי יהיה לי כל זה לכפרת עוון. As we say, לכפרות. Alright, so okay, that would be my atonement that you cause me this suffering. But think about the Rav standing on the pulpit, and that's what he has to say to his to the people that do come to the shul. אבל עיקר הדבר אשר רע בעיניי על ביזיוני, ומה שאני רואה שדברי מוסר שאני מוכיח מדי שנה בשנה אינם מתקבלים. He says, what I really am hearting about is that I'm giving you musar every year and nothing changed. And that's because you disrespect me, he says. So I have no problem with being disrespected. I don't need the respect. But I want my words to have meaning, to have consequences. As he said in the beginning, I do not speak for the sake of speaking. I want my speak to act. And there is nothing that happens. We speak about the same problems every year and nothing change. וכל מה שאני מוסיף במוסר, הפרצות מתגברות יותר. Not even true that nothing changed. It becomes worse. וכל זה בשביל שאני נבזה בעיניהם מלקבל them because they disrespect. This is the noda ביהודה speaking, right? He says, I'm נבזה בעיניהם. They completely disregard me. So my words have no effect. Okay, and then he continues and he tries to convince them to do heed him. But that's, to me, that's a testimony. If you add it to what he said about the coffee houses, he felt that he not only felt, that was the truth. He had no power on the people. Or no power, maybe it's an exaggeration, but not enough. And if we take into account what we know, and that is that it's extremely difficult with the youth, even if you have some traction with the older generation, with the youth that, they look around, they are able to go to Polish schools. They begin to be open publics, not Polish, it was Hungarian schools, Austrian schools. So you can go to them because public schools, it's enlightenment. Public schools are being opened. Jews are being conscripted to the army, which obviously is a mixed blessing. It was not a blessing at all to them, but the way the emperor saw it was, yes, you are being emancipated, so you get equal rights. You should also have equal duties. Right? We have to admit that it makes sense. He gave a drasha to the recruits in the first day they went to the army. He was trying to cheer them up and to obviously to instill in them the need to remember that they are Jews and to keep halacha. But as we can imagine, that was just, it was very far afield. Very far afield. And in the end, I would say how I see the things. What I'm doing now is an analysis, it's speculation, and you can, what we read inside is written. What I'm saying now is my speculations, but I also read it in history books, so I think there is basis for it. As I said, he was a great traditionalist. He was the best shot that traditionalism was able to give, but the best shot was far from being enough. There were other responses to modernity. So we can look at Hasidism. Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov is in the same time as the noda biyehuda. Hasidut was not destroyed by modernity. It destroyed modernity itself, right? So you had Hasidism, you had the Gaon Mevilna and his student, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that would open the yeshivot movement, which is a modern thing, at least in the way that they did it. We would have a generation later, Reb Shishon Raphael Hirsch in Germany with his Torah im Derech Eretz. We would have religious Zionism. There are ways to remain observant in the modern world. All of these movements, some more successful, some less successful, but they are working. What the noda biyehuda represented, which is an attempt to keep everyone as a part of a big Jewish family. Right? No separation to different denominations. Even if you walk to the coffee house, you are still a ben Torah. Maybe you are lightheaded, but you're still learning in my yeshiva. That's a traditional society. Those of you maybe coming from South Africa would recognize that, right? There is one shul, there is no reform and conservative and orthodox. There is one shul, everyone, and regardless if you are keeping Shabbat or not, everyone is part of this big tent. So it worked in some places, but in Europe it didn't. It just didn't. The whole thing in places like Prague, it completely collapsed. Because if you do not create something that is vibrant and dynamic and that can re-energize the youth, and then you must separate yourself from the others in order to prevent the influence, right? The bad influence. If you do not do all of these, it is extremely difficult to survive. That's what the people I discovered in the modern world as an observant Jew. So with that, in a sense, we end the series of the summer with this confrontation. Now, again, I don't think it's a shortcoming of the noda biyehuda as a human being, as an individual. These are cultural powers that are much, much, much larger. But you need to do something new when you come into the modern world. So what I hope to do in Elul, Bezrat Hashem, combining it with Tshuva, is to speak about these different responses to modernity in the last 200 years and what we can learn from them, as I said, about Tshuva. I would like to end our shiur. I would steal 5 minutes, okay, because we began 10 minutes late, sorry. I'm stealing 5 minutes to read from the Hesped of the most close student of the noda biyehuda, that was Rabbi Eliezer Falkles, about his rabbi. He says, אני יצקתי מים על ידו כמו 10 שנים. So for 10 years, I was attached to him. אנא ידענה בעובדין הרבה. So I know many stories about him. בתעניתים וסיגופים מאוד. מי"ז תמוז על ראש חודש אב, לא אכל דבר מן החי. So in the days that we are now, we are used not to eat meat for the 9 days. He didn't eat anything alive. So he became, not only that he didn't eat meat, if I understand correctly, he became a vegetarian, a vegan for 3 weeks between Yudzayin B'Tammuz, 17th of Tammuz, to Tisha B'Av. And then Mirosh Chodesh Av, he ate only hard bread, lechem yavesh, ופיזר אפר על הלחם, on which he put ashes. וכך נהג עד לימי הזקנה. And that's what he did till he was very old and was not able anymore to keep these minhagim. מעולם לא עבר עליו חצות לילה בשינה. He never overslept. What does it mean overslept? he never slept beyond midnight. עד סמוך למיטתו. שלא היה מקונן בחצי לילה על חורבן בית המקדש ועל גלות השכינה. So he would wake up at midnight and begin to cry for the destruction of the בית המקדש and for the גלות השכינה. בקיץ ובחורף, so regardless summer or winter, meaning regardless of the length of the night, הוא היה מעורר השחר וחיבר יום ולילה בתורה ובתפילה. So he would wake up the sun, not the sun woke him, he woke up the sun and he was connecting with Torah and תפילה day and night. 4 פרקים בכל יום קבע ללמוד עם תלמידיו שיעורים דאורייתא, באלה מסכת זו, באלה מסכת אחרת, באלה שולחן ערוך זה. So he would give 4 שיעורים every day 4 שיעורים. And when he was sick, he said, I'm willing to receive, accept my death, to be kapara on Am Israel. And then he says, it's an amazing sentence, לא אנחמכם שמת מצד הזקנה. I'm not going to console you that he died because he was very old. הוא עדיין היה בכוחו וגבורתו. He was extremely strong, even on his deathbed. בנוי ובתו. By the way, we didn't speak about it. There are many testimonies. He was a beautiful man. People were very impressed from his external beauty. And that's what he says. He was also very high. He was very high. Tall, yeah, thank you, tall. Yeah, not a building, yeah, he was tall. Yeah, thank you. He says here, well, we can read it. But he says here that when he would sleep every night, he would put only his head on the bed with a pillow, but the feet he put on chairs. Now, why? So it would be easy for him to wake up and not become tired. He was tired, but not become sleepy. Because if you wake up and your feet are on the chair, it's only a very small movement to throw, to kick the chair, and then you are immediately standing up. That's the way this man slept for, I don't know, for 70 years. So he was an extremely special person. And as I said, anything they said in the end of this shiur is not to take from his power. And as I said, we are using his psikot almost every day and almost in every topic. But the challenges of modernity still needs to be comforted heads up. And that's Be'ezrat Hashem what we're going to speak about this in Elul. Next week, it will be a special shiur for Tisha B'Av. And I hope to speak Be'ezrat Hashem on a person not from the 19th century, but from the 1st century. And that was Rabbi Zechariah ben Avukilas. So we try to understand this man, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avukilas, and the role he played on the Churban. Thank you for joining. Shavua Tov.